Cecil Rogers and his new bride Penelope, she made it clear when they first met that she was Penelope, not Penny. Parsons burst into her parents' large house, laughing and hugging as they walked. As soon as the door swung open, Penelope screamed, "Mommy, Daddy, where are you?" They heard a woman's voice say, "In the living room, darlings." Penelope quickly pulled Cecil behind her and burst into the living room, where the sounds of the television were coming from. Her parents were sitting in armchairs sipping brandy and listening to the latest news. She almost ran up to her mother and held out her left hand to show her the good-sized diamond engagement ring she had gotten earlier that evening. She hummed, "Look, Mom, I'm getting married." Her mother held her hand tightly as she looked at the ring. It was obvious she just didn't know what to say, and before she could say anything, Jordan Parsons, her father, abruptly turned his head and stared at the young couple. He asked, "What did you say, sweetheart?" Penelope snatched her hand from her mother's and walked toward her father, holding it out to him so he could see her ring. He glanced at it, then gave Cecil a hard look before asking, "Are you sure this is a good idea, Pumpkin? We know next to nothing about this young man." "Oh, Daddy, he's kind and sweet. I love him. That's enough. Besides, he's going to get 2 advanced degrees when he graduates from college in May." Well, we'll see," Jordan said before turning his attention back to the news. Cecil and Penelope chatted with her mother some more before moving into the living room for some more alone time. It was past midnight when Cecil reluctantly headed back to his small student apartment. He tried his best to persuade Penelope to spend the night with him, as he had so many times in the past, but she refused. She said, "I know I've spent nights with you before, but tonight I just can't. What will Mom and Dad think? I can't just leave now that I'm home and not come back. I'll be back to school early on Sunday and we'll spend Sunday night together, honey." "Okay," Chuckles. "I'm gonna miss you." Sunday morning, the pastor's family went to brunch at the country club. During breakfast, Jordan asked question after question about Cecil. Finally, Penelope asked irritably, "Daddy, why are you suddenly so upset about Cecil? You've been seeing him from time to time for over a year now." "Yes, but I had no idea that you would dare to do such a thing and marry him. I thought you'd just run around with him like so many other guys and eventually find someone suitable for marriage. I don't know anything about him or his family. How is he going to support you? What are his prospects?" For the first time, her mother entered the conversation, asking, "Is he suitable for you at all? Who is his family? How do we know he's not interested in you just because of our money?" By this time, tears were flowing from Penelope's eyes. She said, "I've only met his parents once, but they seemed like nice people. His father owns his own insurance business and has 5 offices. I know this. I think his mother teaches English at one of the high schools." Dee Dee, her mother, said, "Oh my, his father is a salesman? And his mother teaches in a public school? Oh my, I guess he's burdened with all sorts of debts to pay for college. I guess you're going to have to help him pay it off." "Mata doesn't. We were talking about finances a while back, and he told me that he has no student loans. He always seems to have more than enough money." "Oh my God, he doesn't sell drugs, does he? Or maybe he has a rich relative he gets help from?" "Mama! No, he doesn't sell or use drugs. I don't know about a rich relative." Jordan spoke up, saying, "Well, we have to get to the bottom of this. I'll have someone look into it for you, Pumpkin. You know, a little caution wouldn't hurt." A very depressed Penelope left the country club just after 1:30 in the afternoon. She drove slowly back to the college on the other side of town and, instead of stopping by Cecil's little apartment, went to her apartment where she sat drinking wine and reflecting on the conversation she'd had with her parents during brunch. What did she know about Cecil? Sure, he seemed nice and he always had money, but she had never seen him work or heard him mention work. Once or twice he had mentioned royalties. Maybe he had something to do with oil. Later that night, Cecil called her. After they said hello, he asked, "Where are you, honey? I thought you'd be here by now." "I'm sorry, darling. I'm not feeling well, so I just went back to my place. I was going to call you, but I didn't have time. Will you forgive me?" Sure. I was just worried. Then I'll see you tomorrow." Her parents' comments made Penelope think about Cecil and her relationship with him. Now she was worried about him. That first night after the trip home, she spent that first night in her apartment, and the entire next week after the engagement, she reflected on past conversations with him and her parents. She hadn't spent much time with Cecil, and he was beginning to worry about their relationship. Many times, Penelope wondered exactly what she really knew about Cecil. She was sitting alone in her apartment, trying to study, when her father opened the door and entered the room. When she heard the door open, she jumped up and turned around to see who had entered. Seeing her father, she relaxed and said, "Daddy, you scared me. What are you doing here in the middle of the day?" "Honey, I got the investigator's report on Cecil today, and I wanted to talk to you about it as soon as possible. Pumpkin, you made a big mistake with that boy." "What? What's wrong? He's not a criminal, is he?" "No, but it's almost as bad. He writes obscenity, pornography." "What?" "He's using 2 pseudonyms we've found so far. Under the pseudonym CC Road, he writes adult stories, mostly westerns, and under the pseudonym CC Love, he writes love stories. He has 37 published books to his credit. Can you imagine what our friends would say if they found out something like this? Did you know that in addition to his parents' occupations, his uncle runs a garbage dump, and he spends a lot of his free time helping out there? You couldn't find a more unsuitable guy, even if you tried really hard." Penelope was crying by then. She sobbed and asked through her sobs, "Oh, Daddy, what am I going to do?" "All you can do, sweetheart, is distance yourself from him as quickly as possible and hope no one finds out. I'm sorry I had to be the one to tell you this, but better now than later." Sobbing, she said, "Yes, you're right, Daddy. Will you stay while I talk to him?" Jordan nodded and watched Penelope call Cecil. When he answered, she said, "Cecil, I just got some amazing news. Is it true that you write pornographic and love novels and your uncle runs a junkyard?" Cecil sighed and said, "Yes, I write. I told you I get royalties. And yes, Uncle Randy runs a junkyard. What does that have to do with anything?" "You know exactly what that has to do with anything. How could you keep this from me? What would people think if they knew I was marrying a porn writer or joining a family like yours? I would never be forgiven. Me and my family would be the laughingstock at the country club. Your parents' profession was bad enough, but yours and your uncle's is too much. I'm breaking off our engagement. I'm putting your stuff out the door. Please bring whatever you find of my stuff in your apartment when you come to get your stuff. I just can't marry a man who does what you do and has a family like yours." "You're kidding me. You're breaking off our engagement because me and my family have an honest job? Damn it. I'm glad it happened now and not after the wedding. I knew you were demanding, but I had no idea you and your family were such snobs and looked down on honest hard workers. You know your father's a hard worker too, right? Are you looking down on him too?" "How dare you! Dad is the president of his bank and a controlling shareholder. He is a respected executive, not some working man, as you put it." Before Penelope could finish her last statement, she cut the connection and turned to her father in tears. She clung to his chest as he enclosed her in a hug to comfort her. Jordan stroked the back of Penelope's head and said softly, "Well, well, sweetheart. I knew there was something unhealthy about Cecil and his family. Now relax. You'll find someone more suitable soon enough." Cecil tucked the phone back into his pocket after Penelope turned it off and froze in shock. Soon the queasy feeling in his stomach was replaced by a seething anger. How dare that bitch? He and his family worked hard, supported themselves, and were productive members of society. Sure, his dirty westerns weren't good prose and would never become classics, but he liked to think they weren't pure obscenity either. None of his characters were rabid killers, rapists, or monsters. They were just as free in their sexual preferences as the characters in his corsage rippers. Love affairs. He rose from his seat, grabbed a large garbage bag, and began to go room by room in his apartment, searching for and bagging everything that belonged to Penelope, as well as the things she had given him during their relationship. He really didn't want anything to remind him of her. Searching for her things, Cecil wondered how he could have underestimated Penelope so much. Had he really been so enamored with her looks? He knew she strived for the best in life and admired high society, but somehow he hadn't noticed how superficial she was. He decided he was definitely better off without her, and hoped the pain of losing her would pass quickly. Once her things were gathered and packed, Cecil not too carefully threw them into his car and somewhat recklessly drove to Penelope's apartment, parked, and carried the 2 bags of belongings into the building. He quickly made his way to her apartment and carelessly dropped the bags right in front of her door, then picked up the bag he assumed contained his belongings and headed back to his car without even attempting to speak to her. Cecil went back to class when it resumed. It was obvious to anyone who saw him that something had happened during the break that upset him. It was quickly noticed that Penelope was no longer hanging out with him, and word spread among both groups of friends, his and hers, that she had broken off the engagement. There were numerous rumors about the reason, but none of them even came close to the true one. Cecil struggled to focus on his coursework, and to be honest, his grades had dropped a bit in the last semester. Finally, the last semester came to an end, and with it, graduation. Cecil earned a BA in English and a BS in Business Management. After a short vacation, he divided his time between writing and helping his uncle at the recycling depot. Cecil worked with Uncle Randy almost from the time he got strong enough to be useful, loved cars and listening to customers and drivers talk. When he earned his degree, Uncle Randy hired him as his assistant and began teaching him how to run a business. Many of Cecil's stories featured situations he drew from man talk overheard at the junkyard. Of course, he didn't use modern settings in his westerns, but some situations did make it into the books, both westerns and romances. In addition to picking up parts, maintaining inventory, and helping with sales, Cecil was a car repairman. The classic 1967 Chevelle Supersport he drove part-time was rebuilt from one of his old cars. He did most of the work himself. This junkyard was unique in some ways. Not only did they scrap cars, but they also had a garage to fix mechanical problems and a body shop. Sometimes they would rebuild a wrecked car using parts from other wreck sites and sell it at auction with scrappage rights. These side businesses made the scrapyard highly profitable. The next 18 months of Cecil's life were, if not idyllic, then close to it. He enjoyed socializing with the men and sometimes women who came into the business or worked there. He especially enjoyed socializing with Randy's 2 adopted daughters, twins named Jerry and Carrie. They were each 18 years old. They had just graduated from high school and worked at the dump all the time, helping in any way they could. Their mother had died when they were 16, and since they had no other relatives, Randy had kept them with him without even thinking about sending them away. In the months after he left school, the girls began spending more and more time with Cecil, helping him with everything he did, except writing, which he did mostly in the evenings. He earned enough and didn't need to write, but not only did he enjoy it, he earned royalties. One day the girls were joking and talking to Cecil while he was working, and Cecil asked, "Girls, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to just stick around doing the dirty work, or are you going to go to college and get trained to do more with your lives?" Jerry said, "What else can we do? We didn't do well enough in school to get a scholarship, and Randy can't afford to send us to school. We like working here, and it helps Randy, so why not?" "Because you're too smart to be mere handymen or techies. If you don't want to go to college, you should at least go to a trade school so you can accomplish more in your life than you are now." The girls looked at each other for a moment before Carrie spoke up. "It all sounds tempting, but like Jerry said, we can't pay for it. Other than that, we'd like to do it." Cecil said, "I'll tell you what. You decide exactly what you want to do, and I'll help you do it. College, vocational school, or whatever." Jerry said, "Will you do that for us?" "Why?" "Because I have the money. I like you guys, and you're my family." Before Cecil could even blink an eye, both his arms were in the arms of the crying girls. When the tears dried, they hugged him, and Jerry said, "You won't be sorry, Cece." Many friends and especially family called him Cece. "Thank you, and we really like you too." After a short discussion, the girls decided that they wanted to take vocational courses. Jerry wanted to be a car mechanic and Carrie wanted to do auto body repair. True to his word, Cece paid the tuition. He never told the girls that Randy had enough money and that he could send them something if they asked. Early one morning, just before the girls' classes ended, they called him on the phone in a panic. It was all he could make out through his tears what they were saying. Eventually, he realized that Randy had had a heart attack and had died during the night. They found him dead when Carrie went into his bedroom to wake him up because he hadn't come out for breakfast. Upon hearing the news, Cece jumped out of bed, got dressed, and was out of the house in a flash, heading for his uncle's old house and the crying girls. Cece took all the trouble and supported the girls while they grieved. His father could have done that, and he did help and give advice, but the girls seemed to turn to him for help. Since he worked for Randy and was a writer in his own right, he had more time for these unpleasant tasks as well. A few days after the service, the family gathered at Randy's attorney's office for the reading of the will. Cece's father, Randy's brother, had received a substantial monetary inheritance, but most unexpected was the disposition of the remainder of the estate. All of the property not bequeathed to Cece's father was in a trust set up for the girls and Cecil. The girls each received 20%, and Cecil received the rest. Cecil was the primary trustee. They would each receive their proportionate share at age 25. During the hearing, each girl and Cecil were given a letter from Randy. The letters were very similar. Randy wrote in the letter read to all present, "I love each of you 3 children. I know at your age you are no longer children, but I still think of you that way, so sue me, as if you were my own children. You treated me much better than the offspring of many men. Girls, I know you love Cece, and I believe he loves you. I wish you girls to continue to live in my old house, occupying your rooms until you see fit to move out, or until you succeed in catching Cece and persuading him into something more than friendship. However, the house will be under Cece's control and will be his primary residence if he decides to move in. I know he's always liked that old place, and since he's a business manager now, it's appropriate that his primary residence be there. The girls, Cece and the trust company, control your share of the trust until you graduate from college or turn 25. You may withdraw no more than 1 month's income from your share of the trust each month, subject to the approval of the trustees and after covering your approved monthly expenses, including educational expenses. After you earn a bachelor's degree from an accredited 4-year institution or reach age 25, you may continue to receive a pro rata share of the income from the trust and pay your own living expenses, or you may withdraw the entire remainder of the trust, never to receive anything from the fund again. After reading the letter to everyone present, he handed out copies to each party and a personal letter from Randy. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "I'm not sure any of you are aware of the extent of Mr. Rogers' assets. Cecil, since you are now the chief trustee and manager of this business, you will quickly become familiar with them. Briefly, the trust owns a scrap metal yard, a house, and interests in 2 small businesses nearby, Sonny's Gas Station and Terry's Auto Parts. In addition, the largest holding is the Riverside Country Club." Cece and the girls awed at such a revelation. Carrie said, "Are you kidding me? Dad was always teasing them and complaining about the waste of land, time, and money that was spent on this construction." "No, I'm not joking. You're right. Mr. Rogers really disliked the club and didn't have much respect for many of the members. He always laughed at the sums that those idiots, as he called them, paid him every month for the privilege of playing silly games and telling each other how much better they were than the plebs. He always demanded everything he could get. Every time the land lease renewal came due, he chuckled when he saw the bank deposits." Cece and the girls went back to work after the meeting and sat in Randy's, now Cece's, office. They had occasional tears and periods of silence as they discussed the future. At one point, Cece asked, "Well, each of you probably has enough income now to go to college rather than work here at the company. I know it's too early to make a decision, but think about what you want for your future. I need to spend a lot of time studying the books and records. I had no idea what property and how many businesses Randy owned. I thought the salvage yard was his only source of income and always wondered how he lived so well off of it. I also want to do some major renovations on the old house, if that's okay with you. It could be a lovely house, even considering its proximity to the scrapyard. I think there's enough vegetation in between, and the warehouse wouldn't detract from what I'd like to do with it." Cece spent many hours going through ledgers, documents, and meeting with various people involved in business projects that Randy, now the foundation, was involved in. He took great pleasure in reviewing the country club documents. He found that the annual rent for the club was a very substantial amount, and dues were paid monthly. In addition, if the club defaulted on payments, the entire property, including the buildings for which the club had paid, would pass to the trust. Any beneficiary of the trust also had free full membership in the club. When Cece learned that he and the girls were members of the club, he called them into the office. After they came, he said, "Girls, I want to be an asshole. I just discovered that we are all wealthy members of a country club in good standing. How would you feel about starting to come to the club with me on a regular basis to eat, swim, and do other fun things?" The girls squealed and said, "Yeah, that's so cool. We knew Randy was a member of the club, but he hated those assholes and would never go there. Why do you think that makes you an asshole?" Cece explained the specifics of his breakup with Penelope, and the girls decided that they would be extremely happy to accompany him anytime he wanted and help him rub Penelope and her parents' noses in it with their membership. Cece wasn't sure why he felt the urge to jab, figuratively, Penelope and her parents so badly, but he did. He assumed it was because they had made it clear that he wasn't good enough to marry or socialize with them and their arrogant friends. Friday night came, and Cece put the girls in his last restored 1934 Packard, and they drove to the country club. He decided he wasn't going to pander to a select few, and although he was dressed in elegant slacks, a nice shirt and tie, he refused to wear a suit. The girls, on the other hand, were dressed in very nice clothes from a mid-level store. Their arrival in a gorgeous, beautifully restored Packard attracted a lot of attention from the club members and support staff gathered at the main entrance. As they entered the club's lobby, they were greeted by a swaggering man whom Cece referred to as the usher. He approached them as they entered and said in a dismissive and superior manner, "Excuse me, sir, this establishment is for members only, unless you are a guest of a member. Are you meeting someone, or perhaps you're a guest member of one of our respective clubs?" "No, we didn't have anything else to do tonight, so we thought we'd just pop in and see if we could have a proper dinner. We are not members of another club, and we are not dating anyone. We're members of this club." "As I said, sir, this is a members establishment, and I don't know if you're a member. May I see your membership card?" "I'm afraid we don't have one. Perhaps you should check and then give us a membership card." The man laughed and said, "I'm afraid it's not that easy. You have to apply for membership, get approval from the membership committee, and then, if approved, pay the membership fee. The whole process takes anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. There's no need to do that. We are already members. Here are our identification cards. Why don't you find us a table and we'll have dinner while you check everything out and take care of getting our cards." The man took their driver's licenses from them but refused to seat them. Instead, he made a sign to the guard and said to Cece, "This gentleman will escort you to the waiting room while I sort this out." The guard said, "This way, sir, ladies," and led them into an alcove next to the busy bar, where he pointed to several comfortable-looking chairs. He said, "Please have a seat while we wait for Mr. Wilder." Cece looked at the girls and said, "Well, while we wait, would you like something to drink?" They each chose a glass of white wine, and Cece got up to fetch the drinks. Seeing him heading towards the bar, the guard intercepted him and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't let you into the club without Mr. Wilder's permission. Please return to your seat." Cece had just returned to his seat when another man ran up to him. He stretched his arm out as far as he could and began to speak before he was even in sight of the small group. He said, "Mr. Rogers, it's good to see you, sir. I'm Theodore Sorensen, general manager of the club. I didn't know you were here until Mr. Wilder informed me. I apologize for the confusion about your membership. We're preparing cards for you and these lovely ladies, who I believe are Miss Jerry and Miss Carrie Simmons." "Great, thank you. And yes, that's Jerry and Carrie. Well, sir, we're here for dinner, and we're very hungry indeed. Would you mind taking a table so we can eat?" "Oh, of course, sir. And please let me pay for your dinner because of this unfortunate mix-up. Anything you want for dinner will be on the house. Could we meet soon and discuss a little business? It's not a big deal. We'll just agree on expenses and so on. A lot of our customers keep accounts and pay at the end of the month. Years ago, your uncle asked us to simply deduct his expenses from the monthly rent, but he hardly ever graces us with his presence. Now, please follow me, and I will escort you to your table." As they entered the dining room, Teddy, as Cece called him, turned to the maitre d'. He introduced them. "This is Mr. Cecil Rogers and Miss Jerry and Carrie Simmons, new members of the club. Please inform everyone that their entire bill will be paid tonight and treat them well." "Certainly, sir," he said. Teddy turned to Cece and said, "Ramon will take you away from here. Once again, I apologize for the earlier unpleasant incident. Your ID will be returned when we bring you your membership cards. Please enjoy your evening. And if there is anything else I can do to help, feel free to contact me." From that point on, the service was exemplary, and after they ordered, they thought the appetizers and food were excellent. They also liked the looks that many diners threw at them, especially Penelope, as she always insisted on being called, and her family when they saw them sitting in the restaurant. When they saw Penny, she was talking animatedly to her father and pointing at them. Shortly afterward, her father got up from the table and headed for the exit of the room. Cece saw him talking to Teddy. He blushed and pointed to their table. Apparently, Teddy informed him that they were members of a reputable club because Jordan yelled, "What? That's ridiculous." They saw Teddy shush Jordan and lead him away from the door. He soon returned to the dining room with a grim, sullen expression on his face. He spoke to the members of his group and they continued eating, occasionally casting angry glances at them. After dinner, Cece and the girls went to the dance hall and danced for a while before deciding to head home. As they were leaving the building, they heard Jordan talking to Teddy again. He said, "I want to file a complaint with the membership committee about those inappropriate people who were just granted membership. Rogers and those two girls are ineligible for membership. He writes pornography, and they all work at this unsightly dump. Their membership is totally inappropriate. How they can even afford our membership and dues is beyond me." Cece smirked when he heard Teddy say, "Jordan, I can't do anything about their membership even if I wanted to. Their membership is part of our lease agreement with R&R Development, the owner of the land where our club is located." "How can that be? He writes obscenities, and these two girls are just regular employees at the dump." "Jordan, this is not for public consumption. The land is owned by a trust fund, 60% of which is owned by young Mr. Rogers. The young ladies each own 20% of that trust. Part of our lease agreement requires that the owners of the fund have free, full membership to the club indefinitely. If we are unable to grant them membership, the lease is canceled and the clubhouse and all buildings revert to the control and ownership of R&R Development. On top of that, our lease expires in 6 months. I shudder to think what could happen if we upset them before negotiations are finalized." Jordan's face turned ash gray, and he muttered, "Oh my God," before turning away. When he entered the clubroom and sat down at the table where his wife Penelope and her new fiancé were lounging, he just sat quietly. He took a volley of his drink and gestured for more before his wife asked, "Jordan, darling, what's the matter? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jordan turned to her and then looked at Penelope before continuing, "I tried to get Theodore to call a membership committee meeting and revoke the membership of Cecil and the other girls. He refused and explained something to me that I didn't know before. Penelope, my dear, I've made a terrible mistake, and so have you. Young Mr. Rogers is much more than he seems. I was informed this evening that he indirectly owns 60% of the stock of this country club, and these two young ladies own the other 40%. There is nothing we can do about their membership, and I would advise us to be very careful what we say to them or about them in the future." Penelope turned pale and whispered, "My God, what have I done?" Her fiancé patted her hand and asked, "What do you mean, my dear?" She gave him a pained smile and replied, "Oh, you have nothing to worry about, darling. I just treated those three terribly a while ago, and now I'm very sorry about it." Cecil and the girls giggled all the way back to their house. The trip was short, only 5 kilometers on the road, and even less if they took a shortcut through the fields. Their house was near the 18th hole on the golf course, between the course and the junkyard. Out of respect for aesthetic considerations, there was a wide strip of trees and shrubbery between the course, the house, and the junkyard. Let's face it, even landfill owners don't like to look at it day and night, and country club members definitely don't want to see it. After he let the girls out of the car, Cece carefully put it back into the heated garage, which he then carefully locked. He hugged the girls, and they walked slowly back to the house, talking about the night they had spent. Most Friday nights and a few Saturday nights, the three young men had dinner at the club. After it got warmer, they spent a lot of their free time by the pool. Sometimes a young man would ask one of the girls to dance at the club or try to get them talking by the pool. Some of the young women did the same with Cece. Sometimes the girls danced with a hopeful young man, but mostly they danced with Cece. He always liked, oh, hell, he loved these girls, and it put him in a dilemma. He was more and more attracted to the girls and had bouts of jealousy whenever any of the young men tried to flirt with one of them. His dilemma was which one he was most interested in and how could he communicate that without hurting the other. One night, after they returned from the club, he dragged the girls into the living room and sat them down on the couch. That in itself wasn't so strange. They often did just that when they came back from a walk or sat outside if the weather was nice. They enjoyed chatting, giggling, and, yes, bantering with the toadies and sycophants in the club, otherwise known as pretentious, arrogant assholes. They recognized that some of the attendees were very nice people and they enjoyed hanging out with them, but most of the attendees were, well, nasty. This evening, Cece sat the girls down next to him and hugged them, taking turns on each side. After they snuggled against each other, he sat staring, seemingly at nothing. Jerry finally turned her head to Cece and looked at his face before saying, "Okay, Cece, something's bothering you, so why don't you just tell me about it?" He sighed before saying, "Girls, I have a problem. I love you both, and I don't want to hurt either of you, but—" Carrie stepped in and said, "We know this is stupid. So what's the problem?" "Well, I don't want to hurt either of you, and I'm afraid I will if I can't make a damn choice, and it's not fair to either of you. All these decent men who are after you make me want to spank them for trying it on my girls, and I know I can't have both of you. You need to find yourself men you will love and care for. I've been trying to figure out how I can get one of you without hurting the other. I know I'm messing things up, but—" Carrie pressed her fingers to his lips and asked, "So what's the problem, Cece? You have both of us now. You know we love you too. We were wondering if you'd ever decide to move here, or maybe you didn't want us to be." Jerry nodded silently and smiled as Carrie spoke. She leaned over and kissed Cece before saying, "Cece, you don't have to choose. You know that. We're ready to share. We're twins. You know that. We've shared everything in our lives." "What? That's impossible. I can't get married for both of you. We know that. It doesn't mean you can't love us or we can't love you. We just don't get married. Or you marry one of us and the other one just lives in sin with you. Get over it. You are our man and we are your women. We don't need anyone else and we are content with what we have now. So, are you going to do something about it now or are you going to hesitate further?" Cece smiled and pulled the girls tighter against him before he leaned in and kissed each of them tenderly. He said, "Well, I'm off to bed. Let's see what happens when I get to bed." He got up and headed for his bedroom, shedding his clothes as he went. The girls interjected and followed him, leaving a trail of their clothes behind them. The next morning it was around 10 o'clock when they all sat with misted eyes on the patio drinking coffee. Everyone was smiling and making happy eyes at each other. Cece said, "Gosh, you two wore me out, thank you. I love you both so much." Soon, rumors of the three lovers were spreading around town and the country club. They became more widespread when Jerry started to get a belly. A couple months later, Carrie was also showing signs of pregnancy. There were rumors that Cece was the father of both children. Some disagreed, saying it had to be someone else, but those rumors were put to rest when the birth announcement was published in the newspaper. As you might expect, after the birth was made public, the Parsons saw them all at the club enjoying the pool with the two babies and caused a scandal. Penelope was furious and told her parents, "Look at those three. I can't believe they have the nerve to flaunt their immorality. Someone needs to do something about this." Jordan replied, "You know there's nothing we can do. He's got us at gunpoint. Besides, what has he done that we can fight?" A few days later, a patrol car and an unmarked sedan pulled into the junkyard. A uniformed policewoman and an older man in a suit got out of the cars and entered the office. They stated, "We are looking for Cecil Rogers, Jerry, and Carrie Simmons Rogers. I'm Detective Tolliver, and this is Patrolman Jenkins. I'm Cecil Rogers. What's this about, Detective? We're investigating a complaint, sir. We want to ask you some questions about your marriage and relationship with the two young ladies mentioned above. Cece looked shocked for a moment before he took the microphone and spoke into it. The detective and officer heard from the speakers, "Jerry, Carrie, please come into the office immediately." Soon, two young ladies dressed in stained overalls entered the office. Carrie asked, "What's the matter, Cece?" "These two policemen want to talk to us about our marriage and relationship." The girls laughed, and Jerry asked, "What marriage? You two got married and didn't tell me?" "Do you mean you're not married, young lady?" the detective asked. Cece said, "That's exactly what she means. Why do the police feel they have to ask that?" "Mr. Rogers, could you and I have a word in your office while Patrolwoman Jenkins keeps the ladies company? Perhaps we can clear up a few things, and I can explain everything." Cece shrugged and said, "All right, come on in," then turned and headed for his private office, accompanied by the detective. The detective asked, "Do you mind if I record this conversation?" "I guess not. Do I need a lawyer?" "That's up to you. That's your right." "I'll see how this plays out for a while. I reserve the right to consult a specialist if I decide it's necessary. So, what do you want to know?" The questions came rushing in fast and furious for several minutes. It all boiled down to the complaint filed, which stated that Cece had sexual intercourse with the girls before they turned 18 and impregnated them both when they were under the legal age of consent, in violation of state law. The detective also admitted that a complaint was filed alleging that Cece was married to both girls. Upon hearing this, Cece opened a safe in his office and showed the detective the children's birth certificates, which stated that both girls were 19 years old before the children were born. He also said they had never been married and were, as they say, living in sin. After about 30 minutes of questioning, the detective thanked Cece and asked if he could use the office to talk to each of the girls separately. Cece agreed, and they went to the waiting room so that one of the girls could talk to the detective. After the police left, Cece and the girls sat down in his office and discussed the interview. Carrie said, "Who could have done this to us? We never told anyone we were married and we never had sex before we turned 18. Cece said, "We may never know, but I suspect it was either Jordan, Penelope, or Dee Dee." That Friday, the three lovers hired a babysitter for the children and headed to the club for dinner. When they entered the dining room, they saw that the pastor's family was already seated with two other couples. Penelope and her fiancé were there as well. After they ordered appetizers, Cece stood up and said, "I'm going to have a word with the pastor's family. I'll be right back." As he turned to leave the table, he heard two more chairs creak, and soon a beautiful young woman was behind his shoulders. They approached the priest's table, and Cece said, "We had an interesting day on Tuesday. I don't think any of you know anything about it, do you? You probably wouldn't admit to it even if you did know. I just wanted you to know that nothing has come of it and never will. I would like to remind you that defamation and making false statements to the police is illegal and can have serious consequences. Now everyone have a nice evening." Penelope blushed and gritted her teeth as Cece spoke. After they left, a still shocked Jordan muttered, "What nerve that man has! What was he talking about anyway?" He noticed that an angry Penelope was looking anywhere but at him and asked, "Penelope, did you have anything to do with this?" "Daddy!" "Well?" "I could tell something to a couple of my acquaintances about Cecil's predilection for young girls and that he disregards the laws of morality." "Penelope, I want you to stop this right now. If you're lucky, this will all go away, but you could get yourself and us in a lot of trouble if it continues. He's right. Slander and false statements can carry serious civil and criminal penalties. Do you have any evidence that he or those girls did anything wrong?" Penelope whispered, "No, Daddy, but you said yourself that he's a porn writer. He could have—" "Penelope, stop it. If he's innocent, and no matter what you say, I suspect he isn't, if you have no proof, he could rape us in court if he finds out you wrote a report and made a false accusation. The police can also arrest you for filing a false report if that's what you did. They can also revoke our club membership for cause, and that could even reflect badly on my bank." "Yeah, Daddy, I'm sorry, but he's pissing me off by flaunting these girls in front of us and spending time here at the club where he doesn't belong at all. Randy was happy transferring the excess income from the scrapyard and all the income from the club and his other businesses into interest-bearing accounts. It was certainly safer, but his fortune wasn't growing very fast. Cece and the girls decided, along with one of the trustees, to take a more aggressive path to grow the fund. Some of the funds were invested in the stock market, and others were used to purchase part of a new business that would provide jobs for the local community. It soon became known that R&R Development, and because of it, Cece and the girls became wealthy individuals. They became respected members of the community, and many of those who had previously shunned them tried to place them with them. Cece and his family treated everyone with courtesy, but did not allow anyone to get close to them just because of their wealth. They always felt at home among the common people, as they called them, rather than at the country club. Their gatherings were usually crowded, but almost all the invitees were employees, business associates, or friends they had made before their wealth became known. This naturally upset the country club members, but they never showed their resentment for fear of upsetting the family and missing out on potential gains. Eventually, the family had 4 children, and they made sure that none of them became snobs. They all began working at an early age, either at a recycling depot or at one of the businesses the foundation partially owned. They felt comfortable and found their friends in the people who built this country, the working class. As they grew older, the next generation of Rogers began to clean up the businesses, including Rogers' grandfather's insurance agency, which was transformed into a development corporation upon his retirement.